Torch for 6 years, is that right?
Yeah, and the end of Torch was quite interesting because we'd sold this software to Steve Jobs. We tried to sell it to loads of other people, and we'd also, the end of Torch was sort of the rest of Torch was then sold to an Australian company that wanted the hardware. And about that time, so I had a choice: do I stay with this hardware company or do I go off and do something different? And having gone around and tried to sell this software to people, they said it's really lovely, really great software. And unlike Steve Jobs, who said, "Wow, this is insanely great, we must have this," they said it's very nice, but it's not standards compliant. We want it to be based on the X Windows system, which is what they'd all decided was the future of network remote display. And so we didn't know much about this X Windows system, so we learned a bit more about it. And so I decided to leave Torch, which was becoming a hardware company, and I set up a new company, IXI. So what we decided to do was do exactly the same software again, but built on the X Windows system. And within a few weeks, we'd been able to pre-sell this concept to quite a few people, not least of which was Intel, a company called Locus, and a company called NCR, who were into computers in those days. So we had this 3 launch customers for this wonderful graphical user interface, looking like this one we just sold to Steve Jobs, and drag and drop icons for you. And I think that at that point, by the way, the IXI startup was when I converted into the sort of the dark side of marketing. I ceased to be a technologist building technology and then persuading people to buy it. IXI was a company that said, look, by saying the technology does this, which isn't necessarily as good as you could build, which is the thing we built for Steve Jobs, we sold to Steve Jobs, which is really good. You can build something a little bit weaker, but if it does what they want based on standards, you can then get a long way further. So after a year, our main competitor was a company that built a new system not based on standards. So, and despite the fact that we were funded by hardly any money, I mean, our initial funding was £50,000 from Herman, and that lasted us for quite a while. This company was funded by about 50 million of venture capital in the States, and over the next few years, we beat them. We took the lion's share of the market, and that was because they hadn't converted to the dark side of marketing. They were building an amazing thing that wasn't built on standards. It wasn't open. It didn't fit the customer's needs. Although it was technically probably excessively better than ours, and they had more engineers. We had, say, 10 engineers, and they probably had 100 engineers.
IXI was eventually merged, wasn't it, or eventually bought out? How did that come to pass, and what was that experience?
Well, over 6 years, we took IXI from an idea through to a company that had the lion's share of the graphical user interface market. So when you had a Unix computer, 60% of the time it had our screen on it.
At this point, how big is IXI?
It's about 6 to 10 million pounds turnover. Yep. We had an offer from Santa Cruz operation, and about 3 months later it floated on NASDAQ. But I think more important than everything, as we were being bought, we detected the World Wide Web. So we could see this thing called the browser was coming out, and in fact we were the first, just as we were getting merged with SCO, becoming this new company, we decided to license Mosaic from NCSA, which is the Mark Andreessen, who invented it, had built it there. And there were only 3 companies that licensed it, which was us. There was Quarterdeck, which was a memory expansion company, and Spyglass, who eventually ended up licensing it to Microsoft for Internet Explorer. So, or building something around it that became IE. And we really believed in the web, and so
when very few people did.
In fact, we sponsored along with Wired magazine and IXI sponsored the first World Wide Web conference in Geneva, and I can't remember when that was. It must have been about 92-ish, and very cold and drab Geneva, and I think that the 94 people showed up. So then, shortly after that, Mark Andreessen left to go and join what became Netscape. It became Mosaic, and they changed their name to Netscape, and they started to do the browser. So we suddenly realized, wow, this graphical user interface for Unix machines, that isn't the solution. The solution is to have a layer even above everything and just say there's a browser. No, we didn't, and quite a lot of people shared that vision, but it was a bit radical at the time.
Well, the internet changed everything. As mobile.
It didn't seem like it did at the time.
Yeah, but I'm sure as mobile, changed everything as well, and it didn't seem like that at the time. So you're probably quite used to people saying you're wrong. I would.
A good example of that was we attended an event called Demo 93 in Palm Springs, and by that time we were part of SCO. So Doug Michaels, who was I think it was CEO of SCO at the time, he was either CEO or CTO. He persuaded David Corsi, who was running the event, to let us show this thing called the web browser. And sure enough, we had to get an Ethernet wire wired into the hotel in Palm Springs. And I remember standing up on stage. It was a bit strange because I was dressed as John Lennon, and there was a picture behind me of me in bed with my wife, both of us naked, although we had the sheets pulled up. So it was a reconstruction of the John Lennon Yoko Ono thing, exactly. So, and we had these signs up saying, we had people walking around the demo 93 saying peace and love between Unix and Microsoft, which was, in those days, it was the Unix wars and the Unix versus Microsoft war. And I presented the World Wide Web, and it was very hard to present. It was impossible to explain, because nobody could explain how this window on a PC screen was, we're looking at like a coffee machine here. It's actually in Cambridge with a camera feed. Oh, so it's like a remote video, is it? Yeah, but actually, when I click on this button, it now goes over to some cloud Cambridge images in Geneva. And by the way, when I click on this one, it's gone up to Santa Cruz, where we've got a pizza ordering program. And people just didn't quite... I did a bad job. I think they were overwhelmed by being dressed as John Lennon, or they didn't quite know what this crazy English guy was on about. So that was interesting. And then it was in the era of where the presentation manager was the key thing, and OS2, and although I think Windows had just been launched, it must have been Windows 3, so 1992, 1993, I can't remember the exact timing of it, but certainly Microsoft was very much about client-server architecture and things like that, and ODBC and databases and all these other things. So they didn't really like the internet. They didn't have a TCP/IP stack on Windows.
Well,
they didn't. So,
they?
Yeah, well, yeah, they are. Yeah. But I think what Microsoft realised was that if this web came true, it would undermine the power of the PC, which of course it did. So the person to speak after me was Bill Gates, and he came on stage and says, "God, these English, respect them. A lot of great inventions and things come out of England. But who on earth wants to download things over a modem when you can put 600 megabytes on the front cover of Byte magazine for $1?" And the whole audience applauded and said, "Absolutely right on, fantastic."
But that's a big insight. I mean, obviously, when you're coming onto the stage and Bill Gates is after you, and you're coming off dressed in your funny outfit as John Lennon, and he's saying that basically you're phenomenally wrong, and he disagrees with you, and this is the richest man in the world.
Yeah.
Did you think?
Yeah,
close. But did you think, oh, I might be wrong here?
Well, worse than that. I thought I am wrong, and I gave up. So that's what I did. In '93, after Bill Gates said, after everyone said, "Don't be stupid, that's the worst thing ever," Netscape hasn't got a chance. There's no chance. By about '92, it was almost the stage where I was going to leave SCO and start a new company in the web, to be honest. And after that sort of treatment, I thought, well, Bill Gates says it's wrong. Everyone big says it's wrong. There's CompuServe, there's AOL. Everyone's saying it's the stupidest idea ever. And the only people who think it's any good is a few boffins and Tim Berners-Lee and things like that. And to be frank, and Time was doing their own trial. IBM said it wasn't very good. I thought, well, maybe it isn't very good. And at the same time, of course, I've now got a large amount of, after the float, I've got money in the bank, and I've got shares in a public company, and I've got a lot of things to do now. I'm part of this big new company, a lot of exciting new things to do. Okay, I'll give up. So we integrated and also I had another problem, which was the Unix industry was saying, don't support Windows on the desktop. If we're not careful, if we let the web work with Windows, then the Windows will have a second life on the desktop. Now, of course, they hadn't. They were expecting Unix was going to dominate the desktop in those days, Unix workstations. And there were network computing projects, which actually Herman was involved with. There was the network computer, NC, which was Oracle was pushing, because they didn't like the idea of PCs either. So the whole thing was very, very hostile to the idea of the web. And it was by no means, in fact, it was almost certain to be not a success, even though I felt it was definitely going to be a success. So the fact that it was comfortable to agree with the common wisdom and give up, I gave up.
But what's interesting actually is when we get on to talking about Bango, obviously you would have had people saying the same thing about mobile.
Well, we did. Now that's exactly what happened.
So the learning experience, you couldn't have maybe started Bango without.
Yeah, but I suppose the question there is, that you learn that you should have gone with your instinct or what was going to happen,
beliefs,
and had stamina and gone with it, and you decided because it was a cushier life not to, just to go with your new job and go and do it.